Welcome, everybody. My name is Brandon McLaughlin, and LGA's Fireside Chat series. These chats started off as a part of a now long series LGA has been producing since the start of this pandemic in an effort to provide resources and information to our clients and our community. Today's chat, Normalizing a New Education, Looking at Tomorrow's Classroom, features this high-energy group before you with a lot of diversity and more than qualified to represent and advocate for looking at some of these future implications to our institutions. So with that being said, I'll be our moderator today. I encourage you all to become familiar with the Q&A, which some of you already are. Feel free to ask throughout the duration of the chat, and we'll be monitoring that and asking throughout or at the end. And keep in mind, any questions that we don't get to, we will be following up and sending out afterward if we don't have time to get to everybody. So do utilize that Q&A throughout. Without further ado, I'll introduce Craig Galati, Principal of LGA, to be our facilitator today.
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, panelists, for being here. This is a very exciting one, and it couldn't be more timely than right now with school getting ready to start for some of you, just a few weeks. And we're excited to have you here tonight, and let's just jump right into it. So I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us about, what your institution is doing to reopen, and if we can keep that for a couple minutes, then we can spend more time on the questions. So I'm going to start with Chris on this one.
Great, thank you, and thanks for having me. My name's Chris Watson. And I'm the head of school at the Soundview School, which is an independent school in Linwood, Washington. We're about 12 or 13 miles north of downtown Seattle. We're a small school, so we have just over 100 students in preschool through 8th grade. We have just over 3 acres of campus with 10,000 square feet of classroom and facility and about an acre of forest. Our plans, well, we were just chatting before as a panel that the health officials in our area just released yesterday a statement strongly recommending that schools do not open on campus. So our plans up until today have been to reopen on campus with social distancing measures in place, PPE, all these things are ready to go, waiting for us on campus. We've arranged the desks, and now we need to rethink it. We ran a full virtual school all spring, and we've been focused on improvements to that. And it looks likely that that's going to be where we begin. We are waiting on further information about whether we can run our preschool on campus and or provide some in-person services to our students who have learning differences, for whom doing virtual school is particularly challenging. So that's where we stand today, and my answer would have been different yesterday afternoon, but here we are.
That just shows the fluidity of the situation that we're all dealing with, right? Thank you, Chris. And Melissa, let's move to you.
Sure, thank you for having me. I'm Melissa Gruenhagen. I'm the principal of Cristo St. Viator in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is our second year, so this year we'll have sophomore students. We'll have about 175 total. We're a part of a network of schools, so we have 37 schools across the country, and our model is that students go to school 4 days a week, and 1 day a week they go to work and professional jobs to help offset the cost of their tuition. And so usually we'd be opening, of course, the students in the building and then also going to work. We're starting this year in a hybrid way, so we're giving parents the option. They can either send their students to campus or they can keep them home online. So we plan to do synchronous instruction. So our teachers in the classroom will be online with students, whether they're in person or at home, so that we have equity in the instruction that we're providing to them. Those are our current plans that we're doing a lot of professional development around. What does high quality synchronous instruction look like? Of course, with high schoolers, there's a little bit more flexibility that we have with that in order to do that. And then in person, for the hybrid version, we're keeping our class sizes small, no more than 12, 6 feet of social distancing, and we're using the cohort model. So that's a little bit about what we're doing.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Jeremy.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Jeremy Gregerson. I'm head of school at the Meadows School in Las Vegas. We are independent college prep school, pre-K through 12, about 870 students. And we are, like it sounds like the previous two panelists, looking at a number of different options. Right now, we plan to open with a cohort model in beginning and lower and middle schools. So ages 3 through 8th grade, we'll have a cohort model. We're lucky to have small class sizes already. So the governor's order of keeping kids 3 feet or more apart is not a problem for us. And so we're going to plan to open. And so all the safety procedures that go along with that, between everyone's going to be wearing a mask, we're going to be doing temperature checks, we're going to be doing hand washing, and there's lots and lots of hand sanitizer stations all over campus and on, the things that you'd probably expect. But our upper school, we don't have that kind of room, and we couldn't offer a single cohort model to high school students, right? There's just too many courses of study. So we are going on a hybrid model, a day on and a day off, right? So kids will come to school every other day. And we're going to try to pursue it that way. We also have invested really heavily in professional development and technology so that we can do synchronous learning like Melissa's school. And so we're excited about that. We're also very mindful that there could be a time when we have to either close a cohort or close an entire division for a period of time. So we are ready to hopefully pivot has been the word of the season, right? Pivot to an online experience when and if we need to.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's funny, we were talking a little bit before how challenging times are for schools and for all of you in terms of not knowing, like even Chris, not knowing even yesterday, having a different plan today. And I think flexibility and fluidity is the key word and key phrase with all of us in our businesses these days. And same thing with all the schools. Jeanine, you're a little bit different than the others in terms of not actually being at a school, but so I wanted to leave you for last to open it.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks for having me. Nice to be here with everybody. Yes, my name is Jeanine Collins. I'm the executive director with Nevada Succeeds. It's an education policy nonprofit here located in Las Vegas. We're currently running the Inspired Global Fellowship, which was originally designed to engage educators at all layers of our education system in looking at high-performing systems research across the world. We were set to travel to Singapore this summer. Obviously, that did not happen, and we've actually pivoted, as Jeremy said, to a virtual model and are bringing some of the best learning that we were looking at to our fellows virtually. So we are, and much like all of you, engaged in learning and unlearning in this moment, what it takes to do meaningful work together. Our fellows are elementary, middle, and high school teachers, as well as building and central office administrators, and even representation from the State Department. So I have been working and thinking and collaborating alongside of them and really taking in the challenges that you all mentioned too, just to get the year up and running and being able to address the professional learning needs right now of educators to prepare to do that as best we can.
Wow, great. Thank you very much for all of you being here. So I'm gonna jump into the first question, and it's kind of a two-parter, but I think it connects. And, were student test results affected with the closures? I mean, we just went through a very disruptive time in, everybody's life, adults to kids. And, what are the student test results affected by that? And then how do you foresee in the future being able to measure learning outcomes within our systems? Jeremy, can we start with you?
We generally do the ERB, which is really common in independent schools. It's the Educational Record Bureau exam at the end of every year in grades, I think 1st through 8th, and then we do the PSAT for upper schools, for high school students. High school students, we didn't see any drop off. We had a really great year. We decided not to try to force the ERB because that's a springtime test for us. And so we didn't actually administer that test. As far as their outcomes are concerned, I would not be surprised if there was a slide. You know, among kids, I think we did a very reasonable job of going online and teaching remotely. But that is not who we hired. That is not our model. That is not what we assumed we would be doing when the year started. So I don't think we did it at a level that I would be comfortable with. I think we're more capable now. But it wouldn't surprise me if the kids didn't, if they slid a little bit. I know that the student experience suffered, which is one of the reasons that we're committed to going back to school in person, is that I think it's better for children to actually have an in-person experience with their classmates and their teachers. As far as the ways that we're going to go about measuring student outcomes in the future, I don't know that that's a question that we've arrived at yet, to be quite honest with you. I think that a lot of our focus right now is on curricular change and on pedagogical change. How do we go about administering the educational experience that we want kids to have? And so for the moment, while we've always been a little bit iffy on high stakes testing anyway, as an independent school, it's not something that we really, lean on really heavily. I think that we'll continue to make that part of our assessment of students, but not the only assessment. The other things that we do have to do with our own internal assessments, our own internal curricular development, and measuring ourselves against ourselves. Sorry if that was a little bit of a non-answer.
No, I think, some of these questions, it's hard to answer right now. I know that we haven't been in it long enough, but was a great answer though. And I appreciate it. Melissa, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, so last year we did map testing 3 times throughout the year, and what was really helpful for us to see was we did it essentially as a pre-test, and then a mid-semester, and then an end-of-the-year test. So what we saw was incredible growth in the first semester, and then in the second semester we saw less incredible growth. We didn't see a drop off. So students, we didn't see a backslide in terms of their scores, but we did not see the same level of projected growth that we did in the first semester. So what that told us was they weren't making the same amount of progress online as they were in person. So that was helpful for us because it gave us a good understanding of what did they get in person, what could they do in person, and then what could we provide online. So it's caused us to change a lot of the ways that we're thinking about how we're offering the lessons. And we still continue, we plan to still do map testing in that same way because we want to see how we're doing, in the first semester after having this sort of hybrid model, because the students are going to receive the same synchronous lessons. It'll give us some good information about where we need to make some changes or adjustments in doing that. We administered the test online, and we recognize that there are some limitations to doing things like that because students will have access to other resources that they wouldn't do in person, the test security, that sort of thing. But we think that if we use it as a baseline, if we're administering it to them in this hybrid way, it's at least a data point that we can look at that will be helpful. I mean, in addition, we also have our own in-house assessments that we're using to help understand how we're doing, and we compare our scores against the network of schools that we have. So that's helpful to compare ourselves to what other schools in our network are doing across the country. So yeah, that's what we plan to do.
Wow. Chris, how are you guys dealing with
Yeah, well, similar to Jeremy's school, we've done the ERB test, and we've actually only done it for 2 or 3 years. The school has a long history of not doing standardized testing, but we started doing it as mainly an internal measure, and we did not do it this spring. But what I'll add for us, we do the International Baccalaureate program, preschool through 8th grade. So there were a couple implications there, and then it's been definitely a high priority in terms of our planning. So much of the culminating work in an IB program is community service based. Literally, in our two culminating grade levels, 5th grade and 8th grade, students are in the community, working with mentors, working with community groups, and then they are presenting their work live to the larger community. So we had to move all of that online, which was, I think it was a loss, certainly, to begin with. So we needed to mourn that loss and deal with it. And then we just went to work figuring out what we could do in a virtual environment. And, we were able to host community events that people, we could send invites and people could join and students could present their work. The other piece of that is that the International Baccalaureate has very specific assessment criteria at all grade levels. And we go through an authorization process and an evaluation period every 5 years. So that assessment data is moderated against other IB schools, regionally, nationally, and internationally. So, I'm looking forward to seeing kind of the effect as compared to the rest of the world. I think that's going to be interesting. And I anticipate some of the same things that Jeremy and Melissa have described. And for the upcoming year, what we've done is we typically have a 3-year rotating cycle of curriculum, and there's it's written collaboratively across the entire school. So one of the benefits is the continuity of the curriculum, and we've had to set that to the side and basically do a new curricular plan for this upcoming school year. And we're currently working with the International Baccalaureate on refining that and making sure that it's, continues to be in line with those expectations and assessment criteria. And I guess the last thing I'll add is we have made some investments in software, specifically in more skills-based subject areas, math, literacy, in order to be able to have more precise real-time assessment for students that we can use internally and share with parents. And again, final thought is we also were fully synchronous virtual program, and throughout the spring, really our priority was relationship connections and the social emotional health of kids. So, I think we've been able to shift, at least over the summer, shift a little bit to really thinking through the academic plans now.
Thank you. Jeanine.
So I don't have students directly, right, in the organization that we're working with, but a lot of the conversations that we've been having, kind of reflecting on what happened in the spring and really thinking about this moment as an opportunity to really lean into the question of, what is the data that we're collecting around student outcomes right now, and what data are we not collecting that this moment or the way that we're teaching or the way we might be pivoting in our teaching could allow us to collect. So things like dialogical assessments, where we're really looking at patterns of interaction, the way that students are talking about their learning in real time. Obviously with a distance learning or even a hybrid model, looking at project-based learning and being able to look at different kinds of performance assessments where how the students are making meaning of the standards in action. I think a lot of our fellows are really seeing the opportunity to lean into that. CCSD did not administer the SBAC in the spring, which was not the ERB, but the standardized test that they use. So MAPS testing is something that has been used in terms of charting growth throughout the year. And so I think that they're talking about continuing to use that still, but our fellows are really looking at what haven't we done before that now might be a great opportunity to try out as a result of really embracing a new teaching model.
Wow, thank you. Well, that's a great lead-in for the next question. So, it's funny. I obviously haven't taught the way you guys have taught. I've been adjunct at UNLV teaching in architecture, and I know that most more project-based, but you can always look at the student and by their eyes know whether they're getting it or not. And obviously these were college students, but imagine the same thing in school. So that the online has got to be a bit challenging with that, I would think. So I guess, we've been hearing, I think for years, that maybe our educational models are obsolete, that maybe we should be looking at teaching differently. And I know there's been lots of different ways that schools have been taught over the years. But I'm just wondering is if you guys think that with this current pandemic, that might propel us into a new way, into a new, more learning outcome focused kind of way of teaching. And I think we'll start with Melissa on that one.
Yeah, I really appreciate your reflection on, looking in students' eyes and knowing whether or not they got it. One of the things that we're seeing as a shift is, in a good way, is it's really helping us to focus on what we want to see in terms of outcomes for students. So we're focusing on visible learning from students. It can no longer be, if you can't stand over a student's paper and see what they're doing because you can't literally get that close to them, or they're actually at home, then how do we build in those activities so that we can see what student progress is? So a lot of the focus has become then, we can't do everything. So what are we going to do? How are we going to rework our approach to benchmarks and standards? And then how are we going to assess them in a meaningful way? We have to close that gap with getting feedback from students. So we're trying to build in, those ways where we can see in real time or engage students in real time as much as possible so that we know what they're learning and what they're able to do. I think one of the, so anyways, in general, that is helpful for us to focus a little bit. It's also shifting us from a place of sort of, before teachers maybe they would jump in with technology as they're comfortable, but now it's a way that we need to survive. So we have both a cognitive shift in thinking differently about teaching, but also we need the technical shift in what the skills are that we're going to have. So again, instead of everybody using multiple platforms like that they feel comfortable with, we have to focus in on just a few that we can engage students and all teachers with. So I think in a lot of helpful ways, it's literally putting us on the same page. Right now, that's a Google document page, because it has to be digitally shared. But it's bringing us back to the fundamentals of what's most important for teaching. So I don't know that we're upending the system as so much as we are going back to the basics.
Great. Chris, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I really like what you said, Melissa, and my note here is it's both a look forward and a look backward, and the sort of my version of it is that it's really given us an opportunity to think about our partnership between families and the school. The thing that I say to families all the time is that we're raising children together. And I think that's become sort of truer than ever. We had a lot of meetings with families, over Zoom in the evening when our kids are in bed, just talking through, here's what our work schedule looks like. Here are the things that are difficult about supporting our child in school virtually. And I think that, in an independent school, a small independent school like us, that's a huge part of our value, is that partnership. And then I think at the same time, there are so many creative and innovative ideas out there. I'm thinking, for example, there's a number of groups in the Seattle area of parents that are trying to put together these little at-home learning networks. And so there's this concept of sort of freelance educator. Certainly a lot of attention, obviously, on online learning. A sort of different take on outdoor learning and learning environments. So I think each of these ideas is an opportunity to test our value and to test what we do against these new concepts and say, you know, what things about that work? What are the problems with it? What are the various solutions to those problems? And, you know, are we still positioning ourselves around our mission? And how do we talk to families about that and both support them and support our schools?
I never thought about the whole notion of having to teach the parents how to teach the kids in this new model. So it was hard enough without it as a parent. So I can appreciate that. Jeanine, let's move over to you on that question.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of what Chris is saying. It's been a lot of where a lot of our fellows' thinking has been as the kind of mourning the loss of we're not going to be in the building the way that we knew, and in appreciating the community. I mean, I think educators by nature love other humans, love being with other humans, love unleashing the power of young humans in their presence. And so to feel like there's a barrier to that is a real deep sadness that goes with that as we kind of embark on this distance learning. And in the same breath, it's like, wow, we've had conversations around, gosh, could we teach a lesson online and then suggest that students go out with their families over the next few days and go find this place in the community and look at it together and, you know, continue some work investigating scientific or mathematical aspects of the park and then coming back to the table, you know, like, and things that would have just not been in our purview before are kind of coming up as ways to engage with our community. So I think that, you know, it's absolutely a challenge. And at the same time, like there's things that we're working. So kind of trying to hold on to those. I've heard, you know, both Melissa and Chris say, you know, going back to basics, there's things that work about what we do and holding on to that and building on those strengths. And at the same time, instead of moving, and I think it's been a lot about mindset work. We've been talking a lot about not being afraid or of what's happening, but really saying, where are the opportunities here and how might we be more equitable? How might we be more individualized? How might we be able to have a relationship with a family easier now in a way around a schedule that could happen because we can do Zoom? So I think trying to hold space for both of those things is top of mind for people in the work right now.
Wow. Jeremy?
I love what I'm hearing. I think that the three panelists before me, I think have really hit the nail on the head. And like every other educator, I've been hearing for years that our educational model is outdated. And I think that a lot of times when people say that, what they mean is that schools are not necessarily a bricks and mortar proposition. What they mean sometimes, I think, and what some folks mean, is that we have Zoom, why can't we just do that, right? Or why can't we just utilize the available technology to leverage the finest teacher in the world for 700 students at a time? Well, I think that the pandemic is giving the lie to that notion. I think that that sort of panacea, that somehow we could utilize the internet age to, I don't know, maybe democratize, maybe completely, rethink, reimagine the entirety of our school systems. Maybe not, but the way that it's been presented so far as I've ever seen had to do with separation of humans as opposed to the opposite, which is what an educational experience is really about, which is connection, right? And has always been about connection. And so what we have found, and I'm sure that the other educators here would echo this experience, is that when we went online, it was a massive forced experiment in online learning. It was nothing that anybody said that they were planning to do, and we all made that leap together. But what we found as an unfortunate result of that, in my own experience, was that every issue that our students and our teachers had that was negative or questionable was accentuated and sort of magnified, right? So if you had a child with some learning differences, it got harder, right? If you had a teacher who was less flexible than he might be in certain areas, that teacher got even less flexible. And so the difficulties that you have in running a school and in trying to foster communication and connection between human beings, all of that got harder because none of us were planning to utilize the tools that were available to us. And so I think, like everybody else, it's a look forward and a look backward. I think that a lot of what we've done to foster connections between human beings, to share the sum total of human knowledge, I mean, it's nothing short of that, right? That's the educational project rather. And so we're trying to do this to pass on the knowledge of humanity to the next generation. You don't do that by getting further apart from one another, right? You do that by building connections. And insofar as we can utilize the technology to further connections, I'm all for it. It has been like I said, a strange, it's like walking into the middle of a science experiment. You didn't know what was happening. It's just like, okay, I guess, these are results, and you try to make the best of it as you can. But I think that we're seeing some things that no one really expected when you talked about the obsolescence of schooling.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. As designers of physical space, for us, it's always the whole reason that we do it is to bring people together and to help them create the right type of social bonds within the physical spaces that we do. And I would hope that we're going to be back to still doing that, and maybe we're going to be doing it differently. I don't quite know yet, but I'm wondering though. So from you guys' perspective, has COVID-19 and this whole pandemic that we're going through, has it had you think about the changes you might need to make to your physical spaces that you have now? I mean, you all have schools, they've been built, they were built pre-pandemic. And so what are you thinking about? Maybe I can start with Chris on this one.
Sure. Yeah, I love this question. And I actually found it perhaps the most challenging out of all the questions to think about. So we just put in 2 new classrooms, and we opened them last fall. And so one is they're for our middle school. One's kind of a maker space. We have a course called Design Thinking, so it's like the design lab. And the other is a more traditional kind of humanities language classroom. And I remember thinking or talking through the specifications as we were making the decisions about the buildings. And, one of them is capacity and the technological setup of the room, access to water and storage closets. And now I've been through the building, just a couple days ago, kind of quadruple checking measurements and the placements of desks and tables. And what I realized, just reflecting on this question, is that just the specifications with which we talk about a learning space now are different. And hopefully, we can take kind of both ways of thinking, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and move them somewhere new, different, and better. But when I think about our campus, I think in just doing the planning for reopening, leveraging outdoor spaces would be top of the list. And instead of thinking, we kind of have the indoor spaces and the outdoor spaces, and the degree to which, we could think about not having a separation between indoor and outdoor, I think would be kind of a dream for me and for our campus. And also just maximum flexibility. So no fixed walls, everything on wheels, all kinds of ways to partition spaces for different modes of learning, and to, as Jeremy was saying, I riff off the idea of just creating connection. Lots of different ways to create connections between different people and different groups of students, because we know we can deliver content to everybody individually via the technology, but how can we use the learning spaces and the flexibility that we might be able to have to bring the humans together? So that's the best thinking I've got for that question, but I really like that one, Craig.
No, great. Well, thank you. Melissa, you have a fairly new school too. So, just curious how you're thinking about this, today.
Well, gosh, we're extremely fortunate in the situation that we're in, because we have a brand new school that's built out for 500 students, and we have 175 for next year. And so what that gives us is incredible flexibility in terms of, how we want to approach the schedule, the use of rooms, the space, so we've been able to create this sort of phased approach with it, just with the resources that we have. One of the things that I appreciate coming into the school is that, because I've been at my school for a month. And so one of the things that I appreciate is, or I guess 2 months now, it was built with technology in mind. It was built with the understanding that, we were going to invest in technology and go all in. And now we're able to reap the rewards of that, because we can have, a lot of that flexibility. So in terms of physical space, I'm not sure that I could ask for anything more here, because we have so much open air, open space. I guess perhaps a little bit more shade outside, because we can keep people outside, but it's pretty hot right now. So we're just in a really fortunate position. We're rethinking about how we use any of our materials, though, because they can't really be shared. So how do you approach science labs if you can't use those, traditional things? So just kind of thinking outside the box.
Yeah. Wow. Jeremy.
Like Chris, I was sort of struck by this question. We are in the process, and have been in the process. It's been put on hold of looking at, expanding our campus and adding buildings, and so I've just been sort of going through the thought process of, okay, what does that look like now? And I'm really resisting thinking about utilizing space to protect against a pandemic. I really don't want that to be our normal moving forward. And I don't want to behave as though we have to run school 6 feet apart from one another from here on out. But I think that there are ways of thinking about space, to Chris's point, that accentuate the need for connection, right? That really try to bring people together. And so I think that that's important. For us, we've invested in renting sort of massive tents in areas so that we can do arts classes outside, so kids can sing and play the trombone and whatever in an open air area. So again, I think being able to utilize outdoor space. I know that up in Seattle, you have a different problem with the outdoors than we do. We have too much sun, you have not enough. But yeah, I mean, utilizing outdoor space, to Melissa's point, I mean, having nice shady areas, considering that we get rain 5 or 10 days a year, would be high on the list. And then again, to just echo Chris's point, maximum flexibility, like just massive open spaces that you can imagine, because if we've learned anything, it's that we don't know anything. Right. And so as a faculty member, you want your best faculty members to be able to adapt, not necessarily in response to a crisis, let's hope, but adapt to the needs of the kids in front of them at any given moment. And if the space allows for that kind of really creative adaptation, then I think we're moving in the right direction.
Wow. Yeah, I think outdoor space is something that was, for so long as architects, we were taught to design the tightest box that could be possibly done so that we didn't let the outdoors in. But I don't think that that's the right solution. It certainly was maybe born from the energy crisis as opposed to what real people really need. Jeanine, what I know you don't have a physical plant, but what do you think about this question?
Well, I love it because space is a constraint, right? And so limits give us creative freedom. So I think I love what Chris was saying about design thinking. Our fellows are really, we're embracing a design thinking process for inquiry and reflection in our fellowship. So we've kind of come up with some wild ideas already right off the bat as we go about doing our research and prototyping. I would just say that I think I would echo what everyone's saying, that like, how might space bring us into connection with each other, and how might our challenges around space just help us rethink what it means, what possibilities does that open up for us about learning, and to what do we really need a building for? I think it's helping us reframe those questions. What is essential? What has to happen in a building? What doesn't? I think one of the things we've been talking about is that when we can get back into buildings together, it might give us a greater sense of, a renewed sense of purpose, and maybe a slightly different appreciation for what happens when we are all in the same room together. That can only happen because we're in that room together. So that's something that we've been thinking about. I would also just say too that, you know, we've talked a lot about what our students would say about these questions and how they might really help us come at this in new ways. I think that there's been a fair amount of things that students haven't loved about the online experience as they've had it so far. And there's also been a healthy amount of, I was able to move ahead much faster. I could do things on my own. I think, you know, there's the opportunity to leverage that, those individual needs differently. So I do think that students would have a lot of interesting things to say about what they need in a space. And I think, this conversation just makes me think what a fun design sprint that would be with school leaders and students to really design that future classroom.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the students have a real lot to say. And if we pay attention to them and listen to them and understand what they're trying to say, I think we can be, as designers, we can be better to do that. And I think as administrators and as teachers, you can be better too. And I think that feedback is always healthy. So one of the reasons we like to bring these panels together is to also give you an opportunity to get to know each other. And I know some of you do know each other, but is there any questions that you might have for the group here that you might want to understand what somebody's doing or anything? We'd like to give that opportunity to let you guys ask a question.
I would love to hear how the current climate has. I would love to hear the other panelists talk about how the climate surrounding reopening schools, which has become deeply politicized, both locally but also on a national stage, how your organizations and how you as educators are thinking about this. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but I've been really troubled that the conversation has become so deeply political and tribal almost in terms of the demonizing of different folks on different sides of the question. So I'm just curious, it's a really topical thing for us right now as school approaches.
Yeah. Any one of you guys want to jump into that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Great question, Jeremy. Tough one. And you know, I think, at least in my school community, we're really small, which allows everybody, you know, for the most part, everybody to know each other. And, you know, the campus closure was a real opportunity to rally. So, you know, our Parent and Guardian Association has been really focused on supporting community, and we've maintained our position, which is this is about the health of children and the safety of children, and we haven't been able to not be engaged in it politically, because there is this question of you know, the way I put it to my board is, you know, we're an independent school, independent of what? And what does that mean right now in our decision making? So, you know, we've just tried to stay focused on what we do know, and let all the questions about what we don't know sit until we know something. And for the most part, you know, the community has followed that lead. You know, I think that's my response of where we're at today. But I think it's really tough. And I think as I talk with parents, I think we're just we're saddened by it. Is I think the best word for it.
Melissa or Jeanine, do you guys want to jump in on that one?
Sure. I mean, my answer is, I guess, similar to Chris's in that because we're a small private school, we, making our decisions based on relationships has been really helpful for us moving forward. So one of the things that we did immediately was, well, we've done this a couple times now because it's been sort of a changing landscape, but we polled our parents, which for us, because most of our families are not engaged with online resources mostly themselves, it means calling them. So we've called all of our families, and as this has been developing, like, what are your needs, so that we can better understand them and then we can respond to them. And as long as we're able to meet both needs, that kind of takes the political question a little bit off the table if we have some space to answer that. So if the needs for half of our families, which it looks like right now is about half our families, is that they need a place for their student to be safe and be in the building, then our question becomes, can we provide a safe space for them to be in the building that also protects the needs of our teachers? And because we have a smaller staff and a smaller group of students and families, we're able to make those decisions on a micro level and not have it be a part of the larger politicized issue of it. But it was important for our leadership team to come together and make sure that we had the same framework that we're working from, right? That the health and safety of our students and our families is number one. Number two, that we're providing, a high quality education to them. And number three, that we have some parameters in place when we have to cut that off and say, okay, now we can't provide a safe space, and therefore we have to, make a decision. But we're hopefully letting those, our framework guide that more than outside pressures.
Jeanine, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just say there that I think what I heard there was trust. There's trust at that site level and in smaller groups. And a lot of our fellows work inside the Clark County School District and are in public charter spaces. And there's an adage, somebody shared it with me the other day. I think it goes something like, in general, people don't like public education, but they love their school. Like, how do you square that, right? And I think that, to me, if that's even true, right? Like, if there's truth in that, it's because the relationships with the building principal and the families, like, you feel good about that. And I think that it's hard. I think we've seen that it's hard to scale those relationships. And I say that because one of the outcomes that our fellowship actually seeks to drive is some statewide policy change around strengthening human talent development in the education profession. And so one of the questions that's come up is, well, it's one thing we're going through this deep learning. How are we going to translate that to policymakers in an effective way, right? Like, we're going through this transformative work. We're connecting the dots here in our classrooms, here in our buildings, at the layers of our system. But how are we going to make that leap when there's all these other political elements that get in the way? And I'll tell you, we're leaning into some research around what it might look like to create that kind of collaborative framework with partners across our state, one that really exists within the spirit of collaboration and learning, as opposed to coming in just to compromise, right? And I think so often we know that if you come in with the mindset that I'm here to compromise, somebody's coming to fight with their idea, somebody else is coming to fight with their idea, and then whatever's left standing is what everyone has to deal with. And if that's the frame going in, it's kind of like a losing scenario coming out. So if we can actually go in to these conversations, which we all know is easier said than done, but I think recognizing that the way we show up and the framework for those conversations, the norms we have in place around what we believe about each other and the data that's in front of us and how we're going to make sense of that, I think that's how we start to build to scale that trust beyond the building levels that, the other panelists have.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for that question, Jeremy. That was a good one. So I think I'm going to ask our final question, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. I see we're getting quite a bit of comment in. But I think about, as an architect and a designer of schools, I think it's our job is to kind of design something that works and get out of the way, because that's not why they're there for the architecture. They're there for the learning. They're there for, if you were to ask a student after graduation, what do they remember? Well, they remember their friends. They remember their teachers. They remember what they learned. They might remember a sporting activity or an art activity. They don't necessarily remember the building. And I think if we've done that, we've done a good job. But the buildings have to support these models, and they have to be there to create the bonds that we want to create, right? And so My final question is, if you had a clean slate and you were starting a school today, what would your physical teaching space be like? And I'm gonna start with Jeremy on that one, if I could.
Well, I think, you know, this is an offshoot of the previous question, really. You know, what would be ideal? And I think that, like we've said before, although, you know, I think that there's a comment in the Q&A that says, you know, no permanent walls and ultimate flexibility is fine, but you still have to run plumbing and electric and electricity and so forth. So yeah, I mean, within the realm of the reasonable, I think that recognizing with humility that you can't build a school environment today that is going to be ultimately useful in 20 years. And I think that there's been a lot of that educators and thinkers and maybe designers and architects have long thought that, hey, what you need a box and a wall to hang a chalkboard on, right? And what we're finding is that kind of humility where, look, we just don't know. And, you know, as school leaders, as people in this profession, we like to know. But I think that this crisis has really taught us that things are going to change, and they're going to change. If we get out of the way, they can change for the better. And if we dig in our heels, then things will likely atrophy. So really, I know this isn't much of a new or a nuanced answer, but I really do think that designing with flexibility in mind, and that means surfaces, that means furniture, that means absolutely everything, you know. So not so that you can clear the space and make room for the latest and greatest, whether it's technology, whether it's ways of thinking about grouping students, whether it's ways about pedagogical approaches, whether it's ways of thinking about testing or assessment or anything else. Like, you've got to have spaces that will allow you to change the spaces to suit the needs that arise.
That's great. Melissa.
I mean, I agree very much with Jeremy, and which is that well, and Chris, you know, said this too, is that when you can be more flexible or have things that are more flexible, then you can adapt to things, you know, sort of immediately, like having smaller classes and then the next one's large. You know, if we had that kind of flexibility, that would be great. One thing that I will say, like during the pandemic, that would be just incredibly helpful would be no touch doors. But I think maybe that's the only thing, because it would cut down the amount that we're touching things and the amount that we're needing to clean things at this moment. You know, but I think we've, you know, when we've got lots of flexible spaces, that's been really helpful to think creatively in how to be able to use them. So I appreciate that, like, some of our you know, our building spaces have, you know, you can open up the garage doors and be inside and outside and have, you know, so you can just think more creatively about how you use all of those areas. So if you think in a multi-purpose way, you know, I think those are things that will help to lend themselves to adaptation.
Great, thanks. Jeanine?
Well, two things. I went to high school at Las Vegas Academy, which is the old Las Vegas high school downtown. And I have, when I close my eyes and think of my high school experience, those walls, main hall, the smell are ingrained in my memory of that experience of walking into those dance studios with the cutouts, and we had windows and the teachers put like lighting gels up so it looked like stained glass walls, mirrors, kind of like windows coming through the light when we would dance. And it was just it created a very visceral memory. So I would first say that I think the building really does have a lot of power. And I think, and I was trying to unpack that as you said it, because I was like, is it because of the building or is it because of what happened in that building? But it's all intertwined, right? So when I was preparing my answer for this, I asked my 7-year-old what he loved about his classroom. And he goes, well, I love recess. And I thought, you know, how might school be more like a playground? And then I remembered my other memory, which was walking through the Discovery Museum and thinking like, oh, wow. What if we taught school in here? So I recognize that doesn't have a lot of there's a lot to do with that assertion, but I think recognizing the power of the building in the experience that stays with you, and where students have the most fun when they're on school would be some things I think about.
Great, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, I agree with everybody. And I also thought about this question very literally. So I was thinking about, my school, and we are, it's mostly a series of boxes. So a bunch of spaces that are essentially the same, the classrooms, and then a few unique spaces: performing arts center, forest theater, gardens. And, I think to flip that would be kind of my response, which is that the majority of the campus is built around unique, interesting, this is going to sound like a contradiction, but specific spaces, yet all the flexibility that we've discussed up to this point. Because I think, the things like the chalkboard, the whiteboard, those are things that we've learned how to do differently with technology, especially. But so that's how I thought of it, essentially flipping the ratio of space.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's go to the audience questions. Brandon, can you ask a couple of these, and let's try to get a few of them answered. That if you can group them even, that's great too.
Yeah, I think I want to start off with the very first question by Mina. And Chris, you had an interesting point about community or partnerships, and I think that question is right in line with that. Do you guys see any, there's been a lot of talk too about third space type areas where you're having other civic venues providing additional education, including museums? Is that anyone seeing that?
I'll just quick answer. We, in our area, there's a community college just kitty corner to the school. So we don't have a gym space. So we rent that space from them and just walk right over there, and are able to play basketball or play on the field. And that's been a great partnership. They also have a really high-end fabrication lab. So we have exchanged our design thinking curriculum with their instructors in exchange for using that space, which has been pretty neat. We have a Trader Joe's really close to the school. We in art class, we work with the Trader Joe's mural artist, that does the mural, and we do a whole lesson on that. So we have a lot of partnerships, and we try to focus it on the neighborhood. That's just a few. I mean, I'm just thinking of a whole bunch more that we have in place. So I think that's actually, for us as a small independent school, that is the answer to having, to increasing our resources, is to partner with the community to be able to do that. I think that it's mutually beneficial.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
It's just tough right now with we're trying to limit contact with everyone, and so a lot of our partnerships have been put on hold because we're pausing field trips and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
And one of the things that we have is that we've got space, and so we have had partnerships come to our location. So we're maintaining the ones that use our field or that we can safely partner with. But to that same point, right now we can't safely partner within our building yet.
That's great. I think we'll jump to another one, and because all of our panelists are loosely on the private side, this might be a very good question, not just for Melissa, but a lot of parents see declining, or they're pulling kids from the public side. So has Cristo Rey seen an increase in enrollment as a way to get away from this hybrid learning, or any of this proposed alternate methods?
So our plan had changed up until very recently. We were planning on doing all of our students in the building because we had the space to do that in a safe way. With increasing cases in Las Vegas, we decided to switch to an online version. So I say that because we did see we had sort of a cap where we couldn't take any more students if we wanted to have them in the building safely. But now that we're going hybrid online, we have more flexibility to bring more students in. So we've kind of reopened our enrollment, and we were able to bring more students in from the waiting list. So that's been very helpful because we have that flexible model. But we are seeing increased interest.
Great. Jeremy, do you want to add?
Yeah, we've seen a pretty substantial uptick this late in the enrollment season, as I can only surmise a response to the public school shutdown and parents saying that they wanted an in-person option. So we unfortunately, though, I mean, in order to keep the numbers where we want them and to keep kids distanced and to be safe, we can't triple our class sizes in order to accommodate it. So there's been very little in terms of expansion for us. We have seen an uptick in interest.
Right. And I'll ask a follow-up to that too. I mean, with increased applications, are you guys seeing a greater diversification of your applicant pool, or?
We, as a response to the pandemic, we've really substantially increased our financial aid offerings because it's hit so many families so hard. So for a lot of folks, the assumption is that if you pay for private school, you must be independently wealthy or something like that. But we have a lot of working families. Over 20% of our students are on some kind of financial aid, and they're deeply impacted by this. So we've actually, in order to take care of students that we already have, we've really seen a really big rise in the amount of financial aid that we need to offer, because we want families to be able to have that kind of continuity for their children. We don't want them to have to jump out of school and into another school and then maybe come back at some point. We'd much rather, continue to partner with whoever we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we serve an all low-income population of students, so that is the model of our school. So in terms of diversity, we won't accept students. We accept students based on their income. So in terms of that, we're not diverse in the students that we serve. But it's great to see more interest in the school because we are new.
Okay. Chris, do you want to weigh in at all?
Yeah, very similar. We've had an increase in interest in applications, a variety of folks, some looking for just a better virtual option, and others just looking for increased flexibility of potentially being in person. Same challenge. We have to be careful about the enrollment because we know when we're back on campus, it's all about the square footage per student. So that's actually that's a significant challenge, but increased financial aid, very, very similar to what the other panelists described.
Very good.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience, and then we're going to let our panelists get back to their main jobs.
Yeah, let's go to this, the last question that was just submitted. Are any of you thinking of a combination of learn from home and return to school and shifts to ease the number of students in the physical space? And aside from, I think all of you have made clear what your reopening plans are, but maybe tying Giovanni's question from before, what was some of the parent sentiments behind the different options presented?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. I mean, we gave everybody the option to go remote if they wanted to. And at this point, we're at about 10% of our lower school and something like that for our middle school. The upper school, we did, half in, half out, right? Yeah. We're not going to have everybody on campus at the same time. By and large, parents have been very receptive. I think everybody's nervous and cautious, but also optimistic that we're going to be able to try to provide an experience. So There's no right answer to this. There's no perfect option. And I think that the vast majority of parents are understanding of that we're trying to do the very best we can.
Absolutely. Jeanine?
Yeah, we were surprised when we polled our parents that a little over 50% wanted to be remote, wanted to do online learning. So we're happy to be able to accommodate that for families, and then also provide the other half a safe place to be in the building.
Similar for us, we provided the full virtual option as well. And we very early on in the summer, we looked at the alternating model, but are fortunate to have the space to not need to do that. Just based on some parent feedback, I think that would have been pretty difficult for a lot of families, because we have younger students, so that that was tricky. So, but definitely interested in virtual option for sure.
Yeah. Jeanine, did you want to close on that?
I would just say we're in the public education space. So obviously Clark County School District is going full distance right now. And based off of the capacity issues, that's where they're at, right? And that's how they're going to need to move forward at this time. I think a lot of the conversation that I've been involved with is, this, Melissa said it, like people have engaged with technology in the way that it was comfortable, right? To the way that maybe I'll try this new app, I'll use this platform. I think it's a moment where people are really trying to embrace, hey, this is going to be something that's really going to probably be a part of the way we teach and learn moving ahead. Let's really dive into this and double down on what it looks like to do this really well. And as we move back into classroom spaces, have that knowledge and that skill and that expertise to be able to weave it into the learning longer term. So, but yeah, I think, at some point there were multiple options, and we're just in a space now where it's distance ed.
Absolutely. Greg, did you have any concluding remarks before we close?
I was just going to, once again, thank our panelists for taking the time. And this is the second time we've roped Jeremy into doing this, so I really appreciate it. And you guys showing up and providing such fantastic content. I know our audience has really learned a lot today. So I just wanted to ask if anybody had any closing remarks that they wanted to give before we close it up.
I would just like to thank all of the school leaders on the panel. I have friends and colleagues in your positions, and I think it's just a very tough time to be doing this work. And I think everybody really is relying on school leaders for your leadership and your calm and your vision right now. And I just want to notice that and value it and say thank you.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to close. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it all, and everybody have a great evening.